Today, we are going to be focusing specifically on behavior. We're going to be looking at behavior through a trauma-informed and resilience-focused lens, which really shifts us into looking at behavior or observing behavior as a clue rather than just something we want to change or modify. So as we're talking today, we are going to definitely be talking a lot about challenging behaviors and things that we see either as child caring professionals or as parents or caregivers that can be really, really challenging for us. So I'm going to just give you a list of some of the most common challenging behaviors that we see, some things that we hear from parents, from caregivers, from educators, from clinicians, are things like, kids that just can't sit still, very inattentive, children that are easily angered, maybe those that blurt out in the classroom or maybe in other times that are just not appropriate. Kids that hide, they run away when you're asking them to do something. Children that are fighting, that are defiant, very argumentative, aggressive, certainly like persistent crying and whining. And then kids that are just not engaged, or kids that just seem to ignore when we talk to them or when we ask them to do something. Refusal, withdraw. Kids that appear to be very sad. And then things like being very jumpy or nervous or anxious, appearing to really have like a numb or a very flat affect. And then things like being very clingy. And then one that is one that comes up a lot, kids that just flat out lie when we ask them about something. So as we look at these challenging behaviors, if we are just observing those types of behaviors through the lens of, hey, I see this child who I'm trying to care for or teach or work with, it's really easy for us as adults to say, oh my gosh, this kid is just so mean. Or, oh, she's constantly arguing no matter what I say. Or, gosh, I wish that this child could just sit still for 2 seconds so that I would be able to maybe help him or instruct him about how to do something. I know I hear a lot, it just seems like this child always has to get their way, or they throw a fit. Or gosh, if there's something happening that is outside of any very structured activity or thing that we're doing at home or in the classroom, and there's any sort of transition or downtime, the child just really becomes dysregulated. So just, being able to see and observe those behaviors through the lens of just what it is can really lead us to be accusatory or make assumptions about that child and the behavior that we see, because that is what we observe. When we are looking at behavior just as a clue, what we begin to do is we begin to shift our mindset into being more curious about perhaps what that child may have experienced in the past, maybe what they're experiencing in the here and now, and how those experiences that they have had during the course of their life or they're having currently really, really impact the way those kids are viewing themselves, viewing other people, and then, of course, interacting with others or kind of figuring out a way to just be in whatever environment they are in. So the shift that we're looking for is one of looking at the behavior as a clue and through the lens of curiosity. So to begin, what I would love for you to think about, and the way that I think is easiest to illustrate this, is to just think about an iceberg. And when we hear about looking at or only understanding, let's say, the tip of an iceberg, we're thinking about like that little tiny bit that pops above the water. And icebergs really, from what you can see above the surface of the water, you're seeing about 10% of that iceberg. What we don't see underneath the surface of the water is the other 90% that makes that iceberg what it is. So essentially, the behavior that we see and that we observe with our eyes is the tip of the iceberg. Kind of near the surface, we might be seeing emotions. We might be seeing feelings that are coming out. Those are things that we can see with our eyes that we observe. But there are things that go on beneath the surface. There are things that are going on deeper within that child that are actually driving how much of that iceberg tip we actually see. So those things really are where the magic is in terms of getting at the root of what is driving the behaviors that can often be so challenging for us. So as adults, when we're just looking at the behaviors and the emotions or the feelings, it is so normal for us want to like step in and engage with that child in a way that is going to make either them feel better or make this situation better. We want to do something. We want to change something. We want to fix something. Many times when we talk about behavior, what our immediate goal is to change the behavior or make that behavior stop. But what we know is that those strategies, when we use things like, scaring a child, like you're not going to be able to go out for recess or you're not going to be able to have ice cream if you don't stop, engaging in that said behavior, whether it's crying or whining or acting out. That's sort of just like scaring them, or it's punishing them. Or if you continue to do that, you're going to have to go to your room, or you're going to have to do some extra chores. And then on the flip side, sometimes what we say is, gosh, we're going to reward you for all the times that you're good and you're paying attention and you're on task and you're nice to the people that are sitting around you, or you're nice to your brothers and sisters. We're going to give you a sticker, or we're going to give you a piece of candy. And what we know is that when we use fear or punishment, and even when we use rewards, the behavior might change, and it might change maybe temporarily or for a short period of time, maybe for that afternoon or maybe that day or the couple of days that follow. But those changes are rarely sustained. And it really is because behaviors are coming up from something that is much deeper than what we see at the tip of the iceberg. So I know that it is very normal for us to want to rely on those quick punishments or rewards, but time and time again, they don't have lasting effects. So it's really important to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And that's why we're saying, we want to look at behavior as more of a clue and say, okay, I see the behavior. And instead of racing to do something about it, to kind of fix it or make it stop, we want to slow things down a little bit. And we want to say, okay, I see the behavior. Maybe I see the emotion. But what are some of the things that I can't see? What are some things that are going on with this child that I can't see? What is the rest of that iceberg that is beneath the surface of the water? So if we look at the iceberg and we look at the very, very bottom of the iceberg, so the deepest part, what we want to begin thinking about is that all of us have needs for survival, of course. So we have needs for basic human connection and love. We have needs for food and water and shelter. We have a basic need just to feel a sense of safety wherever we are. And if those needs aren't met, we're really in survival mode. We're really in crisis. And then above that, we have needs like gosh, we function really well when we feel like we're part of a group or we're accepted in a group. And we feel good when we know that we're kind of good at something, when we have a talent or we're able to solve what we're working on in math class. Or, I'm going to my baseball tryouts and I feel like, probably 8 out of 10 times I'm going to be able to catch the ball. We feel really good if we can know how to keep ourselves, regulated. If we know that even if I get frustrated or even if I get scared or hurt, I know that there's something I can do to help myself feel better. I'm not going to, run out of the classroom, or I'm not going to have to go hide in my basement because I don't know what to do, or I'm not going to lay down on the ground and start really having a tantrum. And then we really want to feel like we are of value. So we have something to offer people, maybe like that meaning and purpose in our life. So we look at the bottom of the iceberg and we want to begin thinking about first, our kids' basic needs for survival being met. And then in those areas of what allow kids to really do well, what is being met or what's not being met? And if you think about any one or more of those situations, if we don't feel safe or we don't feel like we belong, or if we can't trust somebody is going to help us when we need help, or if we continue to try to work on a math problem and we just keep getting it wrong, we start to feel certain ways about ourselves and about other people. So we want to first kind of think about what kind of needs do kids have, and are those needs being met? If they're being met, how do they feel about themselves? And if they're not being met, how do they feel about themselves? So when needs are met, you feel like, I'm safe. I can get something to eat when I need something to eat. Gosh, I know how to calm myself down. I think I'm feeling tired, or I think I'm feeling hungry, or I think I need to rest, and I'm going to do that. Gosh, I feel like if I really, work on this math problem or watch a video online about how to do it, or ask my cousin or my friend, they'll be able to show me how. They get their needs met. Those kids feel good about themselves, and they feel good about the other people in their life that they count on to have those needs met. And on the contrary, if those needs are not met, or other people who they hope or wish they could rely on are not helping them get their needs met, they think pretty negative things about themselves and about others. So it could be, I'm not likable. I'm not safe. I'm not worth helping. I'm a failure. I can never get things right. I can't trust people. I can't ask people for help because maybe they're going to think that I'm dumb. And depending upon the needs, what needs are being met, what needs are not being met, and then the different beliefs that we begin to develop about ourselves and about other people and about our experiences, our body begins to have certain sensations. So we all know that when we have stress or when we have worry or fear or hurt, our bodies start to feel not so balanced, right? So we might feel tense, or we might feel like we have a racy heart, or we might kind of feel hot, or kind of like our belly hurts. And when we feel kind of good about our experiences and we're like, hey, I'm learning, I'm part of this friend group, I asked somebody for help and they're helping me, we feel calm in our body. We feel relaxed. We feel engaged. We feel like, we can kind of move and play and interact with each other and learn. So depending upon the need and the belief we have, our body responds and it gives us these various sensations. Those sensations are actually what allows us to give names to the feelings and the emotions that we have. So we know, for example, that we're worried, let's say, if we have sort of like a pit in our stomach. Or we know that we are really, really mad if we start clenching our jaw and we feel a little bit hotter than normal. So you can kind of see that from that bottom of the iceberg coming up, you've got how the need being met or not met impacts the belief about ourselves and others, and how that kind of impacts the way our nervous system is responding and the body sensations that are kind of coming, to that surface. What we do, though, is we often look at the behavior and we look at that feeling or the emotion, and we forget to look at what's underneath. So the idea is to really be curious and digging deep underneath what is happening and what you are observing. So here are some additional examples that I put together of how you might see how behavior can be sort of traced back to an unmet need, a negative belief, a sensation, emotion, and then behavior. So if you take, for example, being hungry, the negative belief could be like, I'm not worthy, right? I am not worth having food because I need to kind of suck it up. We don't have, food in the house, and I'm going to just kind of go to school, and I'm going to try to make it through as long as I can. And I'm going to hope that I can get some graham crackers at, our morning snack time. So that negative belief paired with the unmet need of being hungry leads to perhaps, and I'm just, throwing these out as ideas, sensations of feeling dizzy and having a really bad bellyache. And when we're dizzy and we have a bellyache, it would be really easy to then feel kind of scared and feel angry. Like, oh my gosh, when am I going to be able to eat? And you know what? I'm kind of mad that I don't have something to eat and I feel like this. The behavior we may witness either in the classroom or at a friend's house or wherever could be behavior that looks like it's like really aggressive, even assaultive. It could be behavior that looks as significant as a child stealing something so that they can eat, stealing from the school pantries, stealing from another child's lunchbox, stealing from a store because they need something to eat. Another example is that of not feeling like you have a sense of connection, and then having a belief that you're not lovable or not likable, feeling very empty in terms of sensation. And then the emotion that would go with that would be feeling very sad or lonely. And you can see then how a child's behavior that you observe might be one that is either withdrawal, so withdrawing from everybody because you're not wanting to set yourself up to be rejected, or being very clingy, being very clingy to other, it could be peers or adults, as a way, that child is hoping to get that need met. So there are a couple other examples here that I gave you. Consistency, maybe that need is not being met, or choice. Maybe somebody that's not having a lot of help getting regulated. And then the last one is just that opportunity to feel valuable. So as we go through today, I just want you to be thinking about the iceberg and trying to connect back the behavior you see to the emotion, to the sensation, to the potential negative belief, and then ultimately that unmet need. But there are some different types of behavior that I want to talk about, because sometimes what you see in the tip of the iceberg might not be much at all. And sometimes it might be really explosive and really obvious. So 2 ways that I've thought of to kind of describe this are 2 animals that you also see in the water. One could be like a blow whale, and the other could be just like a duck who's just kind of floating around in a pond. So for that blow whale, we often, let's say we're out looking out at the sea, and we don't see much of anything. And then all of a sudden we see this huge spray or this big blow of water. That is sometimes what we see in kids. It's like, oh my gosh, everything looked fine. And then all of a sudden there was an explosion, and it looked like it had nothing to do with what was happening at the time, or it looked like just a huge, huge overreaction. That sort of behavior is what we would call like an externalizing behavior. It's very obvious. You can see it, but kind of comes out of nowhere. Very, very common in kids that have had a lot of stress and a lot of trauma. So I want you to think about those kids as being whales, essentially. You see the explosiveness, but if you don't look at the whole picture, if you're not really being curious about what is underneath the surface, it may not make a lot of sense to you. So just being curious about that behavior that you're observing and really asking what's underneath. The other one is the duck, and we see this all the time. Kids that are just quiet, kind of mind their own business. But then you're like, oh gosh, this kid is not doing well in school. Or gosh, this child is just having a lot of difficulty, let's say, making friends or having relationships. Or, this child just does not feel, you're thinking, I don't know if that child really has any confidence. They've never raised their hand in class. They've never really asked for help. They just kind of look like, they're just kind of floating around, and they don't cause a lot of trouble. So a lot of times they get missed. And often these kids are the kids that on the surface look like they're just kind of floating through, and maybe, they're doing okay. But then underneath, what we don't see underneath the surface of the water is those webbed feet paddling frantically to try to make it through. And that's kind of, the example of those feet that are paddling is that kid who's like desperate to make friends, right? Wants to know how to do better at school or better at a sport, or wants to do better for their parents, and they just don't know how. And on the surface, they might not appear to care. They might not appear to be very engaged. They might appear to just kind of be sort of flat, or not squeaky, and they don't get a lot of attention. So again, just looking at what you see on the surface, and what you see might be very obvious, and it might be something that goes really unnoticed. So for your kiddos who are, kind of fly under the radar, we have to be curious about what's under the surface as well. So at STAR, we actually have a couple of tools that really help you to get curious about really what's driving the behavior that you see, or what's driving sort of that quiet, that withdrawal, that reserved child that you see. And the two tools that we often use are called a private logic assessment. And a private logic assessment really just helps us to begin asking ourselves, if we were going to guess, what do we think this child would say if somebody said, how would you describe yourself? What are kind of a couple ways what are a couple words you would use if you could describe yourself? How would you maybe describe your family? How would you describe your friends? How would you describe school? And you just sort of like kind of put yourself in their shoes. And these are even things you can ask older children to kind of get a sense as to what their view is of themselves and other people and the environment around them. And based upon how they're viewing themselves and others, you can often begin to determine what they need most and maybe what needs are not getting met. And then another tool that we have is called our universal need assessment. And that really gets at looking at specific needs that people all have in various areas of the child's life. So it really helps us to do a bit of an inventory about how well that child feels like they're connected or they belong in school, in home settings, in their community. It identify strengths of that child. Does that child feel like they're good at anything? And if they are, or if they're not good at things, are those in the categories of school, friends and family, or sort of community things? And then it looks at independence. Is this child able to stay regulated at school, at home, or in other places? Do they feel like they have choice? Do they feel like they can solve problems and make decisions? And then lastly, we look at, does this child feel like they're valuable at home, again, at school, or in the community? And these tools are really developed so that instead of focusing on that behavior, instead of focusing just on the tip of the iceberg, we're really asking ourselves, and we're giving ourselves an opportunity to dig deeper and see what that universal need is that maybe is getting met or is not getting met, and how that's impacting the way that child views themselves and others, potentially those negative thoughts or beliefs about themselves and others, and the sensations that they might be experiencing in their body as a result. So this is just kind of a way for us to remind people to kind of get excited when you see behavior, right? If behavior can be sort of, okay, I see something. This is my opportunity now to say, let me be a little bit of a detective and let me get curious about how this behavior might be connected to something that is much deeper, and is really the driver of that behavior. And what we find is that when you're meeting a need that's not being met, when you're helping that child then to shift that negative belief they have about self or others, everything else kind of comes into line. So the sustainability of behavior change is often much, much better when you're really getting at the root of what is driving the behavior. So of course, for improvement, we're looking at, is the behavior less frequent? Is it less intense? Does it not last as long as it did before? And when you give this a try, you'll be able to see that short-term behavior change that we're used to using through, punishment or rewards, becomes a lot longer lasting if you're getting really down at the root of what is driving that behavior. So now we can get into the question and answer part of this webinar.
Hi there, my name is Bo Hutchings, and I am a professional learning advisor here at Star Commonwealth. Before we get into the Q&A with Dr. Soma, on behalf of Star, we want to thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm here just to quickly share some resources that will help you as a child caring professional. But first, if you want to learn more about us, visit www.star.org. That's Star with 2 R's, STARR, www.star.org. The 3 resources we recommend are the Trauma-Informed Resilience-Focused Behavior Support Plan for Children and Adolescents. This tool will help you maintain a strength-based, non-punitive approach to working with youth in all settings, and there is a version for early childhood as well. Second is our foundational training for child caring professionals in a school setting. This training empowers educators with detailed information and concrete actions that answer not just the why, but also the how to create the best classroom and school supports for students and the school professionals who serve them. This training is called 10 Steps to Create a Trauma-Informed Resilient School. It is available on demand in an e-learning format, or you can reach out to us at info@star.org to learn about scheduling a live virtual or a live on-site experience for your team. Lastly, for our clinical-based audience, we have the Clinical Specialist Foundations package. This package includes our foundational clinical-focused training of children of trauma and resilience and structured sensory interventions too. These courses are available on demand in an e-learning format. In this package, participants will be walked step by step through the impact trauma has on social, emotional, and physical development of youth, and the role resilience plays in creating positive future health outcomes for the individuals they serve in clinical settings. To purchase any of these items, please visit www.star.org/store. To contact us with any questions about these resources, the webinar series, or scheduling a live experience for your organization, email us at info@star.org. Thank you for attending today, and we hope to see you back for our next webinar in a few weeks. But for now, stay tuned for the Q&A with Dr. Soma.
Let me see if we've got one in the chat. So the first question is, how do I help a child regulate their emotions after they come home from a toxic stress situation I may not have control over? Do you have any tools? So this is a really good question because we often hear this, that kids will be in various environments with various different adults and other people and things around them. And depending upon if those experiences and those people feel safe and if they're meeting that child's needs, they will either be regulated or they will not be regulated. So what I always try to tell people is to not get too hung up on trying to keep kids regulated when you are not in their company, right? We don't have much control over what happens. Let's say, for example, if we're a classroom teacher, we don't have a lot of control of what happens at home. Certainly things could happen over a long weekend or over, let's say like we just had like a spring break that we just do not have control over. Maybe there's no structure, there's no routine, expectations are a little bit different than they are in our classroom. We have to just leave that and just pay attention to what we have control over. So when children are with us and when we are able to navigate the setting that we're in and interact with them in ways that help to meet their needs, that's what's more important. So what we want to really think about is the fact that we are giving kids new experiences when they're with us. And those new experiences, when repeated over and over and over again, such as your classroom teacher, let's say you're seeing a child every single day of the school week, 40 weeks out of the course of a 52-week year, you are able to create some really, really good memories because of the consistent, repeated interactions that you have with that child. So trust what you have control over. And when you don't have control over a situation, there's not a whole lot that you can do unless you are communicating, let's say, with another clinical professional or with parents or caregivers. Now, if you know that the child coming into your setting has experienced stress or trauma or both, I think it's important for you to be mindful that they may be a little bit more activated than a child that is just, calm and doesn't have much going on in the way of negative experiences. So we need to question and be curious about what has happened and what that child has been exposed to. But in terms of managing them in our own environment, that is really all that is in your control at that time. Let's see if we have another question here. I know that people often ask me when we talk about this. Here's another question. Let's see. When in a session with a youth, what sort of choices do you make available to them? How do you acknowledge? Let's see. I'm not sure exactly what the question says. What sort of choices do you make available to them? So, I think there's a couple things here. Depending upon your role, you could say you're a parent, you could say you're a teacher, you're a licensed mental health practitioner, and you're doing like a therapy session or teaching a class with a child. anywhere you are, if you're in a session with them, I think it is great to give kids choices and options. But with that being said, I think we have to create a nice, predictable structure with at least a few guideposts. So let me see if I can give you an example. So it might be that as kids walk into a classroom, the expectation is that they find a spot to sit. So the expectation is you find a spot to sit, and maybe what I should say is you find a spot to sit quietly. But in terms of choices, it might be I don't mind what you choose. You can choose to sit on the carpet and sit quietly, or you can choose to sit at a desk, or you can choose to sit in the beanbag chair. But the expectation is that you're sitting quietly. So you're giving them some boundaries and some constraints, and then giving them some choice within that situation. This might look like, let's say you're doing a therapy session. Every time we meet, we are going to engage in some sort of a skill that helps your body relax. Maybe we'll do some breath work. Maybe we'll do some progressive muscle relaxation, maybe some guided imagery. Maybe we'll just do some coloring. So every time you come in, we're going to do something like that. And we're going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes on it. But you know what? You can have the choice. You can pick what we do. So what would you like to do for your calming, more regulating activity today? Would you like to do a new breathing activity? Would you like to do something that we've done in the past? So you can kind of see you're giving them some, guidelines for what to expect every time that you're meeting with them, or every time that they enter your environment or you interact with them, but you're giving them choices within that situation. So next question is, if we meet needs, how soon will challenging behavior improve? That is such a good question. So if we're meeting needs, we have to remember, how long has that child gone with their needs not being met? Okay. So what might be the history? So being curious about the history. If we know that they haven't had some of their needs met, and now we are just coming in and we are beginning to attune with them and meet their needs, they might be a little bit skeptical that we are going to be able to sustain that practice and continue to meet their needs, especially if their experiences until this time have been that adults don't meet my needs, right? So I would say you have to think about this in terms of, again, repetition. It's not going to be one time I make sure, that you have your need met for feeling like you belong in my classroom, having a snack available to you at 10, and making sure that you have somewhere to go if you need to, let's say, calm down a little bit. If you're getting a little bit frustrated, say you're working on, one of those math problems we talked about in the webinar. You have to do those things repeatedly over and over and over again until that child will not just know that you're telling them that you're going to meet their need and see you meeting their need, but actually begin to embody that experience or feel that your need is met, their need is met. So I can't put a number on it, but I will say repetitive. Meeting needs in a very repetitive way over and over and over again consistently will help you see challenging behavior improve. And what we want to remember is that behavior can improve in a variety of ways. Behavior may never go away completely, right? And that's okay. None of us are perfect, nor will we ever be perfect. Sometimes we might try to meet a need and we might fall short. But if you are attempting to meet needs, behavior will start to improve either in terms of how often you're seeing that challenging behavior, right? So the frequency, how long that challenging behavior lasts. So let's say you have a child who does a lot of like refusal, where you think, get your folder out and we're going to start working on this page in this ELA session. And they say, nope, I'm not doing it. Or they just, don't bring their folder out. Maybe after some time, maybe, walk over and, hey, buddy, it's time to get your folder out. Where is it? Is it underneath your other folders and you can't find it? Let's pull it out. That child may more quickly engage in the behavior that you're asking him to, getting his folder out and getting ready for that lesson, than he has in the past. So the challenging part of the behavior might shorten up a little bit. Maybe he'll think, I don't really want to do this, but because I know that my teacher cares about me, and because I know she'll help me if I get stuck on one of these questions or one of these prompts on this work page, I guess I'll get my folder out. And then the last piece of how we see behavior improve, it could be that you just see a reduction in the intensity. So maybe you have a child who, can't really make it through the course of a school day, and they do tantrum, or they do get very, very dysregulated. Maybe you'll see that happening less often. The time that tantrum or dysregulation lasts is a little bit shorter, or the intensity might lessen up a little bit. So maybe you will see a child who still has a tantrum or still dysregulates, but it won't be as intense as it was in the past. So when we're looking for behavior improvement, I just always encourage folks to look at frequency, intensity, and then duration of that behavior. Let's see. Can anyone meet the child's needs, or does it have to be their primary caregiver? Another really good question. So it really doesn't matter who is meeting needs. Typically what we do in survival is, if we can't get our own needs met, we try to find a way to get them met. And either we find a creative way to do it, or we find somebody else to do it for us. Now, the problem is that sometimes we get our needs met in distorted or unproductive or unhealthy ways, instead of like the healthy version of it. But in terms of the person that is supporting the child and is attempting to notice what that child needs, and then provide some sort of support or input or interaction to meet that need, it can be anyone. So really, if you're a teacher, or let's say you are running a group, or you're in a residential treatment center and you've got lots and lots of kids that you are focusing on, and you want everybody to feel a sense of belonging and connection, in addition to you noticing all of the kids and making bids to connect, you could also say, like, hey, I'm going to have everybody have a buddy. Either it's their classroom buddy, it's their group buddy, it's their buddy that they're staying in that same cottage together. And that becomes the person that they're connected to, and kind of their go-to person. What we find is that when kids start to get their needs met relationally, through the interaction of that child and another person, whether it be their parent, their caregiver, any caring adult, or even a peer that is very significant to them, they kind of get the practice, or they learn how that works. And then you start to see how they then can move on to trusting that others will be able to meet those needs. So it's almost like you're the model, or the person who, shows them what that experience is like. And then they're able to, really, I would say, transfer that to anybody else that they're interacting with. Let's see. We have one more question. How do you acknowledge their agency in the situation? Oh, okay. So knowing that they have control, or they have something to do with the situation. So I think that this is really important. I think that this is all about empowerment, and all about that universal need that we want to have met, of that child feeling independent enough to have like control or choice, or decision-making capability. And I think what's important is doing some education for kids, especially if they have a lot of stress, history of trauma. We want to make it clear that it's really hard to think clearly, make good decisions, problem solve, have any sort of sense of agency in that situation, because the parts of our brain that are responsible for those functions, they tend to go offline. So what we have to do is we have to educate them that that happens, but let them know that that's not a free pass, right? Like it doesn't mean that just because that happens, they should go about making poor decisions and hurting people or hurting themselves. So we do the education. We let them know that we understand that it is very difficult to make good choices, to not respond to impulses or quick reactions, but that we're going to teach them ways that they can help make sure that their nervous system allows them to kind of take that pause, and have that opportunity to maybe think for a second before they act in a way that might hurt somebody or hurt somebody else. So in a way, you're giving them the education to understand maybe where they're lacking access to that brain part. But we're also saying we're going to give you this education, then we're going to support you and kind of scaffold you along so that as we help you make those good decisions, you then move to a place where you can do that all by yourself. And I think that that just about wraps it up. We are at about 1:00. I just want to thank all of you for attending. I want to make sure that we are thanking our sponsors who are allowing us to host this series, this Mental Health Matters learning series of webinars, as we just try to kind of wrap our hands around the mental health crisis that's facing children and adolescents today. If anybody has any questions, they can feel free to send an email to info@star.org. And any one of us, either myself or anybody on our team, would be happy to reach back out to you and get you what you need. Thank you so much for attending.